Snow came sideways across the ridge, white fury under a black sky. The wind screamed through the cracks of Ethan Cole's roof, found the loose boards, and made the place moan like it remembered loss. He sat by the cold stove, coat still on, hat brim pulled low. There was no reason to take it off. No one came here. Outside, the world was all storm and silence. Inside, only the slow tick of the clock he hadn't wound in years. Its hands froze on the minute she died, 10 winters ago. He had buried her himself beneath the cottonwoods where the creek bent east. Ground too hard for a shovel that day. He'd used the back of an axe. People said it weren't right, but he'd done it anyway. Then he stopped talking. They called him the Ghost Rancher now. Some said he'd gone mad. Others said he'd made peace with death. But Ethan knew better. Peace never came to men who outlived their purpose. He poured another inch of whiskey into a tin cup. It didn't burn anymore. Thunder rolled down the valley like a freight of old sins. Then, 3 knocks on the door. Light, hesitant, not the kind a man makes. He stared at the wood, unsure he'd really heard it. Then again, 1, 2, 3. Ethan rose, chair scraping the floor. He took his rifle from the wall, thumbed the hammer back. "Who's there?" No answer. Only wind. He unlatched the door and the blizzard burst in, a living thing. Snow whipped through the opening, stinging his eyes. 2 shapes huddled on the porch, small, dark, shaking. "Children, please," one whispered. Her voice was thin as frost. "Help us." Ethan lowered the rifle. "Where's your folks?" The taller one held out a letter, edges frozen stiff, wax seal half cracked. His heart stopped. That seal, he knew it. The small crescent cut into the wax, the mark his wife used on every note she left him. He took it with a trembling hand. The name written across the front wasn't his, not exactly. Just to him. The girls' faces were pale, lips blue. Their coats were torn, one missing a shoe. He hesitated, for one foolish heartbeat, then scooped the smaller into his arms and waved the other inside. The warmth hit them like a wave of mercy. He stoked the stove, piled on what wood remained, and watched color crawl back into their cheeks. "Where'd you come from?" he asked. The older girl tried to answer but coughed instead. The other pressed close to her, clutching the letter. "A lady, she told us to find you. Said you'd keep us safe." "What lady?" The girl looked up. "Our mama." Ethan froze. The room tilted. For a second, the storm outside and the storm inside were the same. He knelt beside them, voice rough. "What's your name, child?" "Clara," the older said. "And this is June." He stared. His wife had wanted those names if they'd ever had daughters. He told her once they'd never get the chance. Life had other plans. The firelight caught something at June's throat. A silver locket, dull but familiar. Ethan reached out before he could stop himself. The pattern etched on the surface was his own handiwork. A bird with one wing folded. He had carved it the night before the fire took everything. "Where'd you get this?" His voice cracked. "From Mama," June said. "She said Daddy made it." The wind slammed the shutters, and for a heartbeat it felt like the whole ridge was listening. Ethan turned toward the window, but the world beyond was white, endless, merciless. He took a breath that hurt to swallow. "You'll stay here till morning," he said. Clara nodded. June leaned against his leg, half asleep. He sat back in his chair, the letter heavy in his hand, the seal unbroken. The girl's breathing softened into the rhythm of the storm. Ethan stared at the fire, whiskey forgotten. For the first time in a decade, the cabin didn't feel empty. It felt afraid to breathe, as if the ghosts themselves were waiting to see what he'd do next. Outside, thunder rolled again. Inside, Ethan Cole held the letter tighter, not yet ready to open it, afraid of what might still live inside the words of a dead woman. And somewhere between one heartbeat and the next, the wind carried a whisper that could have been memory or mercy. "Daddy," it said. "You came back." The wind clawed at the door as Ethan shoved it shut with his shoulder, snow spilling across the floorboards. The latch caught, rattling under the storm's weight, but held. He leaned there a moment, breathing hard, the 2 girls trembling behind him. The hearth was cold as stone. He knelt, struck a match with shaking fingers, and fed the flame into a nest of bark and shavings. Fire crawled slow at first, then took hold, licking orange against the black iron stove. Light spilled across the cabin, flickering through years of dust and silence. The girls stood close together, shivering, eyes wide like strays that didn't trust warmth yet. One clutched the silver locket to her chest, the other still holding the letter he hadn't opened. "Sit by the fire," he said. His voice cracked from disuse. "Get dry." They obeyed without a word. Ethan tossed another log in, the flames snapping high. Shadows danced across the walls, across their faces. He poured water into a tin cup, held it to the smaller one's lips. "What happened to you?" Her hands shook. "The train stopped in the mountains. Mama said to find you if anything happened. She gave us this," the older one added, lifting the locket. "Said you'd know," Ethan stared. The carving on its back, the bird with one wing folded, was his. The same piece he'd placed between his wife's fingers before burying her. "That ain't possible," he muttered. "She's gone." The girls looked at each other. "She said you'd say that," Clara whispered. The fire popped, throwing sparks up the chimney. For a moment, Ethan couldn't move. The storm outside raged like an old enemy, hammering the roof, shaking the window panes. "You're sure it was your mama?" he asked. Both nodded. "She said to find our daddy." His chest tightened. He stood, pacing once before the stove. "You got this wrong," he said. "I don't have daughters." But she said, "Enough," he snapped, voice louder than he meant. The smaller girl flinched. Guilt hit him like a nail through the boot. He exhaled slow. "I'm sorry, I don't understand." He turned away, staring at the storm through the frosted glass. His reflection looked back, older, hollow, ghost-eyed. Behind him the girls curled together by the fire, their breaths soft, uneven. Ethan's hand found the letter again. The wax seal was cracked now, half melted from the heat of his grip. He wanted to open it, to end this madness, but some part of him feared what truth waited inside. He dropped it on the table beside the lamp and busied himself with small tasks. More wood for the fire, an old quilt over their shoulders, a pot of stew warming, though none of them were hungry. After a long silence, the younger one spoke. "What's your name?" He hesitated. "Ethan Cole," she smiled, faint and tired. That's what she said. His throat closed. Minutes passed like hours. The fire crackled. The storm roared itself hoarse against the cabin walls. One of the girls coughed, deep and ragged. Instinct moved him before thought. He knelt, pulled her into his arms, felt how light she was. The other leaned close, clutching his coat sleeve. "You'll stay till morning," he said softly. "We'll figure this out when the light comes." Both nodded, eyes closing as warmth and exhaustion took them. Ethan eased them onto the cot near the stove, covered them with his old blanket. They looked small there, smaller than any ghost should. He sat back in his chair, staring at the unopened letter. The edges curled in the heat. A name waited inside. Hers, his, theirs. But his hands wouldn't break the seal. Outside, the wind wailed through the trees. Inside, the only sound was fire and breath, and Ethan Cole. The ghost rancher sat in his own home like a man half alive, watching the storm guard two sleeping strangers who called him Daddy. Dawn crept through the cracks in the shutters, pale gold spreading across the cabin floor. The storm had passed, leaving the world outside still and white, every branch glazed in ice. Ethan sat by the cold stove, the letter before him. His fingers hovered over it like it might burn. The girls still slept, curled together beneath his blanket. Their breaths came soft and even, faces turned toward the warmth. For a moment, he almost let the quiet win. Then he reached for the paper. The wax seal crumbled under his thumb. He unfolded it slow, careful not to tear. The handwriting hit him first, neat, slanted, the same way she used to write grocery lists on the back of feed receipts. He traced one line with his finger, as if she might still feel it somewhere. "Ethan, if you're reading this, I'm gone." His throat tightened. The fireless stove reflected his face back in dull steel, eyes hollow, jaw clenched. "They said you killed him." I told them it wasn't true. They burned the ranch anyway. I ran. The girls were born that spring. I hid them until it was safe. He stopped. The words blurred. "If you find them, tell them I never stopped believing in you." The last line was smudged, like she'd written it through tears. Ethan sat there a long time, letter trembling in his hands. 10 years of silence broke all at once, memories he'd buried clawing their way up. The fire, the mob, the smoke rolling over the ridge. He had thought she'd died that night. The guilt had eaten everything since. Now she'd written him from the grave, asking him to forgive a world that never would. He folded the paper slow, careful, then folded it again until it fit into his breast pocket. The edge pressed against his heart. Outside, the snow caught sunlight like scattered glass. He stood, crossed to the window, and looked down toward the valley road. That's when he saw them, hoofprints. Fresh. 4 horses, maybe 5. Ethan's pulse quickened. No one rode this high in winter unless they were hunting something. Or someone. He turned toward the girls. Clara stirred, rubbing her eyes. "Mr. Cole?" "Shh." He moved to the rifle hanging above the door, checked the chamber. 1 round already loaded. "Stay quiet, sweetheart." June sat up, voice small. "Is it the storm again?" He shook his head. "Just wind." But his tone gave him away. He went to the window again. The prints led up from the ravine, men on the ridge trail, half a mile out and climbing slow. He could see a flicker of movement between the trees, metal catching light. Memories tightened around him like barbed wire. 10 years ago, they'd come the same way. 5 riders, torches, ropes, lies on their tongues. The law had believed them. The town had turned its back. He thought he'd buried that night forever. But ghosts never stayed buried long on Black Hollow Ridge. Ethan pulled on his coat and stepped outside. The cold bit deep, air sharp as glass. His boots broke the crust of snow with every step. He followed the hoofprints until he saw how fresh they really were. Edges clean, no drift, no melt. Less than an hour old. He turned back toward the cabin, smoke rising faint from the chimney. Inside were the 2 pieces of his wife's truth. The proof she'd lived, and the proof she'd loved him still. He rested a hand on his revolver, the same one that had been taken from him the night they'd called him a murderer. "Not this time," he muttered. Behind him, the ridge wind carried faint voices, men shouting, laughter sharp against the snow. Ethan stared down the trail until the light bled from gold to gray. Then he whispered toward the cabin, to the girls inside, to the ghosts still watching. "You're safe now," he said. And for the first time, he almost believed it. The days came slow after the storm, each one carving a little more life back into the cabin. Snow melted from the eaves in thin silver lines, dripping steady into the trough below. Smoke rose from the chimney again, a sight the valley hadn't seen in years. Ethan woke early now. Habit, maybe, or the sound of giggles from under his old blanket. The girls would sit by the hearth, tangled hair glowing in the firelight, whispering secrets in voices too soft for ghosts to hear. "Morning." "Mr. Cole," Clara would say, shy but polite. "Morning," he'd answer, voice rough with sleep. He taught them how to pour coffee without spilling, how to split kindling with a steady hand, how to tell if a flame burned too fast for the wood to last through night. The lessons weren't planned. They just happened, the way small mercies sometimes do. By the 3rd morning, the silence between them had changed. It wasn't heavy anymore, just quiet, the kind that let people breathe. Ethan found himself repairing the old fence along the east pasture. The girls followed, their boots sinking into the thawing ground. He handed them coils of wire, showed them how to pull it tight between posts. "You twist here," he said, guiding Clara's small fingers around the pliers. "Don't fight the wire, let it turn how it wants." She grinned, the same grin his wife once gave when mending reins. "Like it's alive?" "Exactly," June giggled, balancing on the lower rail. "You talk like Mama," that stopped him. For a moment he just stood there, watching their hair dance in the wind. Back inside, they fed the mare together. The horse had been mean with strangers for years, but she lowered her head gentle when June offered a handful of oats. Ethan watched the small act, something loosening in his chest he didn't know was still bound. "You've got her trust already," he said. "Guess she knows family when she sees it," Clara said, then bit her lip like she'd said too much. Ethan didn't answer. He just nodded, though the words echoed long after. That evening, He made bread for the first time in a decade. The flour was old but not spoiled. He worked it slow, the girls at his elbows. Their laughter filled the space where ghosts used to sit. "Why does it look funny?" June asked, poking the dough. "Because I'm out of practice," he said. She giggled. "Mama said Daddy couldn't cook either." Ethan smiled without meaning to. "Smart woman." When the loaf came out hard as a saddle, they ate it anyway, dipping chunks into honey. Clara said it tasted perfect. He didn't argue. Later they sat by lamplight, the wind whispering around the cabin. Ethan told them a story, one his wife used to tell him on nights they couldn't sleep, about a woman who sang to coyotes so they wouldn't be lonely. Clara leaned forward. "Did they listen?" "Every time," he said. "Even the mean ones." June rested her head on his arm before she drifted off. Clara followed soon after, both breathing in rhythm with the ticking clock he'd fixed that morning. For the first time in years it worked again. Ethan stayed awake, watching the lamplight play across their faces. Something in him wanted to believe this could last, this quiet, this warmth. But belief came hard to men who'd once buried everything they loved. He stood, stepped outside. The night was clear, stars sharp enough to cut the dark. The ridge loomed beyond the barn, black, silent, eternal. He stared at the trail that curved down the far side, the same one the riders had taken years ago with torches and accusations. Wind moved through the cottonwoods, whispering against the bark. He imagined hoofbeats buried somewhere in that sound, faint and patient. He rubbed the revolver at his hip, not out of fear but memory. Inside, a laugh burst from one of the sleeping girls, soft, dreaming. It drew him back. He closed the door gently, stood there a moment in the quiet hum of the stove. Then he whispered, half to them, half to her, "Guess I ain't a ghost no more." Outside, the ridge watched in silence. Inside, the cabin breathed again. The thaw came slow that spring. Snow still clung to the shaded gullies, but meltwater ran through the grass in thin silver veins. The cabin smelled of sap and smoke, of wood newly cut and bread baked right. For the first time in a decade, the place felt lived in again. Ethan had taken to fixing things that didn't ask for it. The porch rail, the window latch, even the old clock gear by gear. The girls followed him everywhere, full of questions that didn't wait for answers. They were learning the shape of safety. He was relearning the sound of laughter. That afternoon, while Ethan mended a harness outside, June's voice drifted down from the loft. "Mr. Cole!" "What's this?" He looked up to see her leaning over the railing, holding something small and dark in her palm. Dust sifted down like falling ash. Clara climbed beside her, eyes widening. "It's a bird." Ethan wiped his hands on his coat and stepped inside. The girls knelt on the floorboards, studying the thing in wonder. It was a small wooden carving, wings spread, one chipped and broken clean off. The wood had blackened on one side, scorched by fire long ago. June looked up. "Did you make it?" Ethan froze. Memory hit like the first blow of a hammer, 10 years gone the night before the fire. He'd carved that bird at the table while his wife laughed over the sound of rain on the roof. Said she wanted one for each child they might one day have. He'd promised her he'd finish the second after the branding season. "He never got the chance." "Yeah," he said quietly. "That's mine." "Mama said you made one for each of us," Clara whispered. Ethan crouched beside them, the carving trembling slightly in his calloused fingers. "Guess I didn't finish the second." The girls shared a look, something bright and knowing between them. June brushed the dust away and held the bird up to the light. "It's still pretty," he smiled despite himself. "Broken things can be," he said. They found a place for it on the window ledge overlooking the snowfields. The bird caught the last of the evening sun, its shadow stretching long across the wall. That night, the wind came soft through the cracks, carrying the scent of thawing earth. Ethan couldn't sleep. He sat at the table, staring at the carving in the moonlight. The fire burned low, embers whispering. Somewhere in that half-silence, memory rose like smoke. He was back in the old house, the one that burned. His wife humming while she brushed his hair from his eyes, her voice low, sweet. A lullaby about a bird that could fly even with one wing broken. The sound of laughter, the faint smell of rain and oil and cedar, Then the roar of flames, the shouting, the crash of wood falling. He saw her face through the smoke, mouth forming words he never heard. He woke with a start, sweat cold on his neck. The room was dark but calm. The girls slept sound in the loft above, breathing slow, safe. He looked at the carving again, then at his hands. They weren't steady. Before dawn, he went out to the barn and found a block of scrap pine. He set a stool by the open door, light gray on the horizon. Then he began to carve. The knife moved slow, guided by something older than thought. Shavings fell like curled snowflakes, gathering around his boots. He shaped the curve of the wings, the tilt of the head, the faint ridge of feathers along the back. When he finished, the bird was smaller than the first, smoother, untouched by fire. By the time the girls came running from the cabin, the sun had climbed high. June stopped short, eyes wide. "You made another one." Ethan nodded, thought maybe the first shouldn't be alone. Clara took it carefully, turning it in her hands. "They look like sisters," she said. He smiled, heart tight. "Maybe they are." The twins placed the new bird beside the old one on the sill. 2 wooden wings caught the morning light. Inside the cabin, the clock ticked steady. Outside, the thaw carried the sound of water and bird song, and for the first time in years, Black Hollow Ridge didn't echo with ghosts. It rang with the small, certain noise of life returning. The morning came clear and sharp, the kind that cut through silence. Frost glazed the fence posts, and the sound of the mare's hooves echoed clean across the pasture. Ethan was hauling water from the well when he heard it, the distant jingle of spurs. A mail rider crested the hill, coat white with dust. He waved as he approached, slowing his horse near the gate. "Morning, Mr. Cole," he called, handing down a folded telegram. "Figured you'd want this quick." Ethan wiped his hands and took it. "Any trouble on the road?" The man hesitated. "Only talk. Down in town there's a fella asking for you. Says he's a bounty hunter out of Denver. Claims says you torched your own ranch 10 years back. Sheriff don't seem sure what to make of it." Ethan felt the air go still. The sound of wind in the trees seemed to fall away. "Name?" he asked. "Didn't say. Big man, black coat, quiet as death. But he's got paper, a warrant signed by someone important." The rider shifted, uneasy. "You didn't hear that from me?" Ethan nodded once. "Appreciated." The man tipped his hat and turned his horse, glad to leave. Inside the cabin, the girls sat at the table, still warm from breakfast. Clara was mending a doll made of scrap cloth. June was tracing the edge of the bird carving with her finger. They looked up as Ethan entered, his face carved in stone. "What's wrong?" June asked. "Nothing you need to worry over." He hung his coat on the peg, but his hands shook slightly as he did. Clara frowned. "You only say that when it's bad." He managed a small smile. "Sharp girl." When he started gathering his gear, revolver, coat, saddlebag, the truth was already written in the air. "Where are you going?" June's voice cracked. "Town. You can't," Clara said. "You said it wasn't safe." "It ain't," he admitted. "But running makes it worse. Men like that don't stop till they get what they want." June's eyes filled, small and defiant. "Then don't go alone." He knelt beside her. "Sweetheart, I've been alone a long time. I can manage one more day." She hesitated, then reached into her pocket. "Take this." She pressed the small wooden bird into his hand. "For luck." Ethan looked down at it, smooth, clean, her carving now worn from small fingers. He tucked it into his coat pocket, over his heart. "Guess I'll need it." The girls stood at the window as he rode out. The trail wound through the ridge, the same path he'd watched all winter for ghosts. Now he was the one disappearing into it. The town lay quiet beneath a pale sky. He could smell the livery before he saw it, horses sweating, hay turned sour. People watched him ride down Main Street, not openly hostile, just cautious, like they were remembering something ugly they'd agreed to forget. The sheriff's office sat across from the saloon. Sheriff Harlan stood outside, older now, his badge dull, his eyes worse. He froze when he saw Ethan. "Morning, Harlan," Ethan said. "Cole," the man muttered. "Didn't expect to see you back. I hear someone's asking for me." Harlan's jaw twitched. "Best not make trouble." He's got papers saying you're wanted in 3 counties. Ethan studied him. And you believe him? The sheriff looked away. Ain't my belief that matters. It's the laws, Ethan almost laughed. Law didn't do much believing 10 years ago either. He turned before Harlan could answer and stepped into the saloon. The air hit him like smoke, whiskey, sweat, the creak of boots on old boards. Conversations died one by one. At the far end, a man sat alone, broad shoulders under a long black duster, hat pulled low. He rose as Ethan approached. Ethan Cole, the man said, voice slow and even. You're a hard one to find. Not hiding, Ethan said. Just living, the man smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. Some might say that's the same thing. He reached into his coat. For a moment, Ethan's hand twitched toward his revolver. But instead of a gun, the man pulled out something small. A wooden bird. Burned on one side, wing chipped but whole, Ethan's breath caught. Found it at the old homestead, the bounty hunter said. Still smelled of smoke. He set it on the table between them, the faint scorched edge gleaming in the lamplight. Funny thing, Mr. Cole. There were 2 of these once. Seems you kept the other. Ethan's hand went to his pocket where June's carving rested, whole and clean. 2 birds, 2 daughters. 2 lives the world tried to burn. The man's smile sharpened. Reckon we should talk about that fire. Outside, the wind shifted. A storm was brewing again over Black Hollow Ridge. Rain started before dusk, the kind that smelled like iron and memory. The saloon's lanterns flickered under the pressure of the wind, shadows crawling across the walls. Ethan hadn't moved since the bounty hunter dropped the burned bird on the table. The man poured himself another drink, calm as if they weren't circling ghosts. Name's Rowe, he said finally. I don't take work I don't understand. So before we finish this, I want to hear it from you. Did you burn that ranch? Ethan's jaw tightened. No. Rowe studied him for a long moment, then nodded. Didn't think so. Then why ride under a false warrant? Because men lie better when they think they're winning. Rowe leaned closer, voice low. Your old partner, Calvin Ridgway, he's the one that paid for the fire. Wanted your land, your cattle, your wife. When she wouldn't have him, he took everything else. Ethan's stomach turned to stone. He's dead, he said. He died the night of the fire. Rowe shook his head. That's what he wanted you to think. He changed his name, bought influence, and waited. But the past has a way of calling back what it owes. He's sending men up your ridge tonight to finish what he started. The room tilted. Ethan stood so fast his chair crashed backward. The girls, Rowe caught his arm. You can't outgun a dozen riders in a storm. Ethan's voice was a growl. Watch me. He bolted through the door, into rain that came down in hard silver sheets. Thunder rolled over the valley like God had remembered something terrible. His horse snorted and reared, but Ethan swung into the saddle with one motion and kicked hard for the ridge. Behind him, Rowe shouted something lost to the storm. Ahead, lightning split the horizon, lighting the road in brief flashes, trees, fences, the river swollen with rain. The world blurred into one endless streak of gray and fire. He rode harder than he had in years, wind slicing through his coat, water stinging his face. Every hoofbeat hammered one thought into his skull. Not again. He crested the last hill just as the sky went white. Smoke rose from the ridge, thick, dark, too familiar. For a heartbeat he couldn't breathe. Then the wind shifted and he saw it. The cabin, his cabin, alive with flame. No, he whispered. He dug his heels in and drove the mare forward. The storm roared, lightning throwing everything into cruel focus. The fence posts glowing like bones. The barn half collapsed, sparks racing through the grass. As he neared the cabin, he saw movement in the window. 2 small figures, pressed close together, faces lit by firelight. One of them held up the carved bird against the glass, like a plea to whatever heaven was watching. Hold on, he shouted. He hit the ground running, threw his shoulder into the door. The heat was a wall, the smoke thick enough to claw at his throat. Flames licked across the rafters, popping and snarling like wild animals. Clara! June! A cough answered him, weak, terrified. He followed the sound through the haze, covering his mouth with his sleeve. The stairs were gone, eaten by fire, so he climbed the beams instead, splinters tearing into his palms. The girls were huddled near the loft window, the carving still clutched tight. Their faces shone with sweat and soot, eyes wide but alive. Daddy! He gathered them both under his arms. The roof groaned above them, a sound that meant seconds left. Close your eyes, he said. He kicked the window out with his boot. Cold air rushed in, mixing with the smoke. Below, the porch roof waited, a 6-foot drop through flame and wind. He wrapped the girls in his coat and jumped. They hit hard, rolled through the mud. Behind them, the cabin gave a final roar and collapsed inward, sparks bursting like stars. Ethan held the girls tight, rain hammering down. They were coughing, sobbing, alive. The carved bird lay in the mud beside them, blackened but whole. Ethan picked it up, his hands trembling. "It's over," he whispered, though he knew it wasn't. Not yet. Somewhere beyond the ridge, thunder rolled again, closer this time like hoofbeats on wet ground. Ridgway's men were coming. He looked toward the fire's dying glow, then down at the girls, eyes fierce in the rain. "Not again," he said. Not ever again, and as the storm broke over them, Ethan Cole rose from the ashes a second time, ready to finish the fight that started 10 years ago. The storm passed sometime before dawn, leaving the ridge shrouded in smoke and steam. The air stank of wet ash and gun oil. Ethan Cole stood in the wreckage of his life, again. The cabin behind him burned slow, collapsing in on itself like a heart giving up its last beat. He held the twins close as long as he dared, coughing through the smoke, lungs raw and lungs burning. They clung to him wordless, faces streaked with soot. When they cried, it wasn't loud. It was the kind of crying people do when they've already seen too much. Down the slope came the sound of horses, heavy, unhurried, a dozen, maybe more. Men who believed themselves the end of a story. Ethan looked around for shelter, but the only thing standing was the old stone wall that bordered the pasture. He led the girls there, crouched behind it, his revolver heavy in his hand. "Stay low," he said, voice rough. "No matter what happens, you don't move till I tell you." Clara nodded, clutching June's hand so tight their knuckles turned white. He looked at them once more, memorizing their faces. The same eyes he'd buried 10 winters ago, now alive again through them. He brushed a strand of hair from June's cheek. "You remember what I told you about fear?" She sniffled. "It don't mean run. It means ready. Good girl." He turned toward the flames. Hoofbeats stopped at the edge of the clearing. Shadows dismounted, rifles catching the firelight. The man at their front stepped forward, broad and cruel-faced, hat dripping rain. "Ethan Cole," he called. "The man you were is dead. Hand over what's left of him." Ethan stepped out from the smoke, revolver low, coat torn, face blackened. "You already took everything I had," he said. "Ain't much left to hand over." The men fanned out, circling him with guns raised. "Ridgway wants the girls," one shouted. "Says they ain't yours. Says you stole them same as the ranch." Ethan spat into the dirt. "Tell Ridgway he's welcome to come claim that lie himself." They laughed, a low, ugly sound that made the horses restless. Ethan didn't wait for them to shoot first. The first man fell before his laugh finished, a clean shot through the chest. Ethan turned, fired again, another drop into the mud. The night exploded with muzzle flash and thunder. Sparks leapt from the burning timbers behind him, framing his silhouette in red and gold. He moved with the precision of a man who'd already died once. 6 rounds, each one a reckoning. One through the shoulder, one through the spine, another through the hand that held the match 10 years ago. The smell of gunpowder mixed with the rain, and every echo carried down the ridge like a bell tolling for the past. When the smoke cleared, the clearing was silent. Only one man still moved, crawling toward something half buried in the mud. Ethan walked over, gun steady. The man reached for it blindly, the carved wooden bird. "Funny," Ethan said, voice gone low. "You burn a house, but some things won't stay dead." The man tried to speak, but blood choked the words. He fell forward, hand landing beside the bird. Ethan holstered his revolver. 6 shots fired, 6 souls accounted for. The fire behind him hissed as the rain came down again, steam rising from the coals like ghosts leaving the earth. He turned back toward the wall. The twins were there, wide-eyed, shaking, but alive. He gathered them both, held them until his arms trembled. "It's done," he whispered, though part of him knew it never really would be. Dawn broke over the ridge slow and red, painting everything in the same color as memory. Down the trail came a horse and rider, the sheriff, hat low, coat dark with rain. He stopped at the sight before him, the wrecked cabin, the fallen men. Ethan standing amidst the smoke with two girls pressed to his chest. "Good Lord," the sheriff breathed. "You were telling the truth all along." Ethan didn't answer. He just stared at the sunrise pushing through the last of the storm. The carved bird lay in the mud beside him, scorched but unbroken, catching the first light of morning. And as the sheriff dismounted in silence, Ethan Cole finally let himself breathe. Not victory, not relief. Just the hollow peace of a man who'd burned everything false to ash and found what was left was still worth saving. Spring came slow to Black Hollow, but when it did, it came like forgiveness. The snow melted first along the creek, then down through the valley where wildflowers began to bloom in cautious color, yellow, blue, violet. The scars on the land softened beneath green. So did the ones in Ethan Cole. The new cabin was smaller than the old, but it stood solid, every board fitted by his own hand. The walls smelled of pine and linseed, the windows clean enough to catch the whole ridge reflected back in gold. It wasn't a monument to what he'd lost. It was a promise to what still lived. That morning, sunlight poured through the open window, catching the slow swirl of sawdust as Ethan worked on the porch. His knife moved steady over a block of cedar, shaving off thin curls that fell to the boards like feathers. The rhythm calmed him. The girls' laughter drifted from the field, clear and wild as birdsong. Clara chased June through the tall grass, both barefoot, both free. Their dresses were patched, their faces freckled, and their joy was loud enough to fill the spaces the fire had left behind. On the windowsill, the old wooden bird sat in quiet dignity. Its once broken wing was now mended with a twist of silver wire, the work of small, careful hands. Clara had done it herself, tongue poked between her teeth in concentration, refusing to let Ethan help. "It ain't perfect," she'd said that day. He'd smiled. "Neither are we." Now the bird caught the morning light, gleaming as though reborn. It faced east toward the ridge where the old trail wound out of sight, the same ridge where the flames had come and gone, and where, if you looked close enough, spring grass was already growing through the ash. Ethan's hands never stopped moving. He was carving another bird now, smaller, smoother, a piece of clean cedar that smelled of rain. Every stroke of the blade was soft as breath. He shaped the curve of the neck, the folded wing, the small beak poised as if in song. June trotted up onto the porch, breathless. "Papa, what are you making now?" He smiled at the word. It still hit him every time, small and simple, but big enough to anchor him to this earth. "Another bird," he said, "for you and your sister." Clara joined them, bits of grass in her hair. "Why?" Ethan paused, turning the carving in his hand. "Because every home needs a few reminders," she frowned. "Of what?" He nodded toward the old one in the window. "That even things that break can fly again." The girls looked at each other, then at the bird. June reached out, tracing the silver wire with her finger. "It's pretty," she said. "Like it's got a scar, but it shines." Ethan's throat tightened. "That's the best kind of pretty there is." He set down his knife and watched them run off again, hair catching sunlight as they disappeared into the meadow. Their laughter rolled down the hill like music. The porch creaked beneath him as he leaned back in his chair, the smell of new rain riding in from the west. Beyond the ridge, thunder rumbled faint but soft. Not a warning this time, just the voice of the land, breathing again. He glanced at the window. The two birds sat side by side now, the mended one and the new one, guarding the house in their quiet way. Soon he'd carve a third. "One for each of us," he murmured, running a thumb along the fresh grain. The sky dimmed a little as clouds gathered, and somewhere out past the ridge a single bird sang, a lonely, triumphant sound carried on the wind. Ethan listened until the last note faded into the valley, and for the first time in years, he smiled without weight. Spring had come back to Black Hollow. So had life.